Hayden Trenholm, One Door Opens. Reg King knew the day was about to turn peculiar when the fat man blocked his entrance to Paddington Station. Rather, the man had been fat once, but now the skin hung off his face and neck like last year's holiday bunting. Reg pushed past him, but the man clasped his shoulders with bony fingers, tightened on his flesh like a crow clutching a twig. "I'm late," said Reg, lifting his wrist to show the man his watch.
"Contrariwise,"
said the man, his voice high and fluty,
"you are exactly on time."
None of Reg's fellow Londoners seemed to notice his predicament. He and the man had become an island past which the river of life flowed. "What do you want?" Reg asked when it was apparent he had no choice but to engage. The man frowned.
"That is not the way to start a conversation. One should start by saying, 'How do you do?' or by introducing yourself."
It's late in the game for that, thought Reg, but he had learned long ago that it was best to humor crackpots. He had certainly met a few in his time. "How do you do?" he said. "My name is Reg King."
"Precisely,"
said the man. He hesitated, looking carefully to the left and right.
"I'm Dee."
"It's a pleasure to meet you, Dee. Now, what do you want?" Okay, so I wrote this story in one sitting as I was flying back from England to Canada. So I'd just spent some time in London. And the story is a bit of a pastiche of Alice in Wonderland. So there's a number of things going on here. So the character of Reg, if you're in London and you go to certain bars near the city, near the center of the city, where people who work in finance or other typical insurance jobs, those kind of things that they do in London a lot, you'll hear people talking in bars, and there's a certain kind of male voice that you hear in those bars of men who are trying to display their sophistication, and yet there's a kind of feeling of insecurity in the way they talk. So to some extent, Reg King's voice comes from listening to those conversations, or rather eavesdropping on those conversations, which is something that as a writer I do a lot. I eavesdrop on people to hear how they speak, how they express themselves, the kinds of forms they use to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish in conversation. The character of Dee, on the other hand, is the other way of creating voice. So Dee is, of course, Tweedledee from Alice in Wonderland, and the story is about particle physics. So Tweedledee and Tweedledum are kind of an entangled pair, and here we have Dee is separated. So there's a kind of lost quality to his voice. At the same time, I'm trying to, I attend a lot of science fiction conventions, listen to a lot of people talk about particle physics. I read a lot of physics. So Dee became this mixture of the voice from Alice in Wonderland, but deprived of its echo. So it's only one side of Dee's voice. And then I merged it with the kinds of conversations you hear, both by experts and by people who think they know more than they do, talking about particle physics. So it was a case of creating a character that was an amalgam of a number of different things, literary on the one hand, and then real-life discussions and things I'd read on the other. So that was the way those two particular voices came about, which sort of demonstrates the range of ways that you create voice, partly by listening to people talk, partly by reading and imagining a new individual, someone who doesn't really exist, but to try and create this individual who talks in a particular way. Sure. Well, I started out when I was first writing. I wrote plays, stage plays. That was the thing, and that came out of the fact that I was heavily involved in community theater. I'd been in a lot of plays. A lot of them were pretty bad, and I came to the conclusion that I had some stories I could tell through dialogue, because when you're writing from the stage, that's all you really have is dialogue. And the challenge there is to try and create specific voices that actors can work with. So what you're doing is creating a framework of language that the actor can then pour emotion and motion into. So that became my focus, trying to write really clear dialogue that operated on a call and response, that operated as a, with heavy subtext, where so every word that you write has to carry a lot of meaning, and at the same time, the sentences have to be easy to speak aloud. Actors really like it when the language flows out of them. So my focus was really creating stage dialogue. And as I moved more into fiction, so after I'd been writing plays for 7 or 8 years, for one reason or another, I began to be more attracted to writing fiction. Dialogue on the page in a novel or a short story operates quite differently than dialogue for the stage. You use different techniques. So, for example, you can write more complicated sentences because when people are reading them in their head, it's much easier for people to read them in their head than it is out loud. So you're allowed to explore more things. And of course, you can also use motion, description of motions. You can describe the setting, you can describe the circumstances. So dialogue is now more embedded in larger narrative, and that's significant. I mean, and it's really quite different. A quote I always like is from Mariel Hemingway, who is Ernest Hemingway's granddaughter, but also a very successful actor. And she said, on the page, my grandfather's dialogue is beautiful, but you can't speak it out loud. And it's quite true. If you try to write a play using the direct lines of dialogue from Hemingway's stories, it doesn't sound natural. So you're able to do different things with dialogue in fiction than you can when you're writing for the stage. And when you get to the screen, where everything has to be so concise, again, it's a completely different process. So my dialogue has sort of gone that way, has moved more towards a literary form rather than a performative form. Sure. As I say, a lot of it has to do with listening. You listen to people, and one of the things I used to teach people how to write dialogue. I used to do workshops on it. One of the exercises I gave people to do is go and sit in a public place and just listen to two or three people talking. If you can secretly record it, all the better, but try and then replicate it and look at what people say. And what you discover is that natural speech is full of hesitations, it's full of filler words, it's full of diversions, false starts, and so on. Looking at how people communicate and then try to figure out what it is they're trying to accomplish through their communication. Because when people talk, they do so for a purpose. They're either trying to tell someone something, or they're trying to elicit an emotion, or they're trying to negotiate things. So if you start to boil that down and you see the connection between the kind of language people use and the way they express themselves, forcefully, softly, you can begin to see how you can boil that down from speech to dialogue, which is a different thing. So that's one thing I would suggest is really useful, is to try and really have an ear for people's voices and what they're trying to accomplish with speech. So that's one tip I would use. And the other one is, of course, just read and read and read. There are some great writers, great masters of voice out there, and also selectively watch films or stage plays, particularly from actors who are often described as character actors, but even though they may be in starring roles, they're people who create those characters who are so precise and well-rounded that you can't even see the actor behind the performance. Okay, so if you're talking about playwriting, anything by Harold Pinter. Harold Pinter is able to say more with fewer words than any other playwright alive. He's simply the master of dialogue, the master of voice. He creates characters with just the barest brushstrokes of language. So that's one example. For film, watch Daniel Day-Lewis. Daniel Day-Lewis is the consummate character actor. Even if he's in the starring role, he completely creates a new personality, a new person out of the tools of his body and his voice and his emotions. So, whether it's My Beautiful Laundrette, which was his first role, My Left Foot, where he played a person who's so disabled that they wrote literally with their left foot because that's the only part of their body they can control. And then you jump to The Last of the Mohicans or Gangs of New York or The Boxer. All of these films, you cannot see Daniel Day-Lewis within them. And partly it's because he was very selective about the roles he took. He took roles where the writer has succeeded in creating a framework of language that he could then fill. So that's in the film side. In terms of books, Kashiwa Ishiguro, who wrote The Remains of the Day, his ability to create these characters that are so believable that they drive you crazy. You see what they're doing. You see, and their voice is so authentic. James Kelman, who created a brilliant, unreliable narrator in How Late It Was, How Late, which won the Booker Prize. Certainly brilliant. A good example of a recent science fiction novel where voice is interesting technique to create authentic voices is the Oppenheimer Alternative by Robert J. Sawyer, in which Sawyer took actual testimony from trials and various interviews and so on, and then was able to then create new dialogue that is completely consistent with the personas of famous historical characters, Robert Oppenheimer and Leo Szilard, the people who made the atomic bomb. So there's lots of good examples out there. And I think those are some of the ones I would mention are really quite exceptional. And Patty Doyle is another one. Or Roddy Doyle, sorry, who wrote Patty Clark, Ha Ha Ha. Again, a brilliant. Patty Clark, Ha 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 is brilliant because it's the voice of a 10-year-old, and yet it's a sophisticated voice, and it's absolutely believable. And the 10-year-old understands what's going on in his life as a 10-year-old would, and to achieve that as an adult writer is really quite an amazing accomplishment. So those are some of the examples that I would look to. And of course, I mentioned Hemingway as well, especially the short stories, the Nick Adams stories, for example, Men Without Women. Those are some really amazing examples of dialogue too.